The year was 1940, and Europe was burning. One by one, nations had fallen to Adolf Hitler's lightning war. Poland was crushed in just weeks. Norway and Denmark were overrun in spring. France, the pride of continental Europe, had collapsed in only 40 days. Now, the British Empire stood as the last major power defying Nazi domination. Isolated, battered, but unbroken. Across the Atlantic Ocean, America watched with growing unease. Officially, America was neutral. The scars of World War I still lingered deeply in the national memory, and most Americans wanted no part in another European conflict. But President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood that Britain's survival was vital. If Britain fell, Nazi Germany would control all of Western Europe, and possibly the Atlantic itself. So, Roosevelt made a bold move. In 1940, the United States began quietly sending supplies, equipment, and food to the British, under programs that would soon evolve into Lend-Lease, one of the most significant acts of wartime support in modern history. It was a lifeline disguised as logistics. Under the Lend-Lease program, the United States supplied not just guns and tanks, but trucks, fuel, ammunition, and even food to the British people. American factories began working around the clock. The smokestacks of Detroit and Pittsburgh churned out engines of war. Liberty ships sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, braving German U-boats and stormy seas to deliver hope to a nation under siege. For the British, every shipment that arrived meant another day of resistance, another night the lights of London could flicker back on after the blackout. For the Americans, it was more than charity. It was a calculated investment in global stability. As Roosevelt famously said, "If your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't argue about payment. You lend him your garden hose."
Meanwhile, tensions were rising elsewhere. In Asia, Japan was expanding aggressively across China and Southeast Asia. In Europe, Hitler's ambitions were only growing. Then, in September 1940, a new alliance was forged, one that would change the course of the world forever. Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact, formally creating what came to be known as the Axis powers. The agreement wasn't just a statement of friendship, it was a declaration of unity against any nation that might threaten their ambitions. The pact declared that if any one of the three was attacked by a country not already involved in the war, with the exception of the Soviet Union, the others would come to its aid. It was a warning directly, squarely at the United States. The message was clear. If America entered the war against one Axis member, it would face them all. But that didn't stop Hitler's diplomatic momentum. Within weeks, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania joined the Axis alliance. Romania's decision was partly strategic. It wanted to reclaim the territories of Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, which the Soviet Union had seized earlier. Hungary, too, had its own grievances with the post-World War I borders that had stripped it of lands and pride. Aligning with Hitler promised both revenge and reward. By late 1940, the Axis powers had extended their reach from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The totalitarian world order was taking shape. In contrast, the Allied world, made up mainly of Britain and its Commonwealth, stood alone, dependent on American industry and faith. And yet, even as the Axis powers celebrated their new alliance, a quiet transformation was happening across the ocean. The United States, though not yet at war, was mobilizing. Military planners in Washington began drawing up detailed strategies for a possible global conflict. New training bases were built. The draft was reintroduced. American industry shifted from consumer goods to wartime production.
Factories that once built cars began assembling tanks and bombers. Airfields appeared across the countryside.
Engineers, scientists, and laborers worked together to prepare a nation for a war it had not yet entered, but everyone knew was coming. By the time 1941 dawned, Roosevelt's gamble had paid off in part. Britain was still standing. The Royal Navy controlled the seas, and British airmen had fought the Luftwaffe to a standstill. But in June of that same year, Hitler made his most reckless move yet. He turned east and invaded the Soviet Union. In response, the United States extended the Lend-Lease program to a new and unlikely partner, the USSR. It was a pragmatic decision, not an ideological one. For Roosevelt, any enemy of Nazi Germany was a friend worth supporting. Soon, Arctic convoys sailed north through the frozen waters, delivering American trucks, fuel, locomotives, and food to Soviet ports like Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. This alliance of necessity bound together nations that couldn't have been more different: capitalist America, Imperial Britain, and Communist Russia, united against a common enemy. Meanwhile, the Axis alliance grew bolder. In the oil fields of Ploiești, Romania fueled Hitler's tanks. Hungarian divisions joined the Eastern Front, fighting deep inside Soviet territory. Japan continued its campaigns in China, tightening its grip on Asia. The world was now split in two: democracy and dictatorship, freedom and fascism. By the end of 1940, the stage was set for the greatest conflict humanity had ever known. The Axis powers stood united in conquest, while the Allied nations, though divided by distance and ideology, shared a single goal: survival. And in the background, the United States, still technically at peace, was preparing for the inevitable storm. Factories thundered, convoys sailed, trains trained. America was not yet in the war, but history was already pulling it in.